good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Looks like we have a global group. I see people from Indonesia and Hong Kong. So good morning. Really appreciate your being here for this, as well as people in the USA, and great to have you all here. So as Elaine said, my name is Eric Bergman. I am a managing director at MIT Sloan Executive Education, and I am hosting this webinar along with my MIT colleague, Bruce Cameron, who is the director of the System Architecture Group at MIT, and he is the faculty director of the new program debuting in July called Leading Technical Professionals and Teams. And Bruce, as we were talking earlier, is both an experienced faculty member at MIT, deep grounding in research, and he is a recovering technical professional. So in the great tradition of MIT mind and hand, thought and practice, he brings both study of the field and the question of what is distinctive about managing people who work in technical environments, technical professionals, and also the experience as well for this. So just flipping over to what we're going to discuss today in this webinar. We're going to talk about what makes technical professionals tick. I suspect that we have a number of you here who are technical professionals, hopefully also in other fields as well. We're going to talk about key impediments to motivation and productivity and how to overcome them if you are a leader or manager of technical professionals, and how to encourage a culture where these individuals thrive in their work. Now, we want this to be as interactive as possible. Bruce is going to share his work, and I'm going to turn it over to him in just a second. But please put any and all questions that you have into the chat. We will have an opportunity at the end to pick up on those questions. But bring them in now. Love to hear from what you have to say as you listen to Bruce. And so now, very happy to turn it over to him.
All right.
Bruce, floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. I've had the privilege of working with Eric probably for the last 10 years at MIT. I've been at MIT for, I guess I hadn't discovered Eric in my first decade at MIT, but anyways, we've had the pleasure to work together often. So as Eric mentioned, this is a subject that's close to my heart. Basically, developing this course has been a sort of passion for me. It broadly parallels my career at MIT in the sense that I have the privilege of actually teaching in our two main schools. I teach in the School of Management, here we are, but I also teach in our School of Engineering, where some of my work has looked at what are the underpinning technical details, and I've had the privilege to manage lots of challenging technical professionals myself in that process. So I'm showing here some of the firms with which my group has done work and which the course in this webinar is going to draw on in terms of research and examples. I also had the privilege of either being a board member or supervising a number of startups that come out of MIT. MIT has a famously sort of entrepreneurial ecosystem, and a lot of that experience in my mind sort of relates to like how do we get a company off the ground? What do we need from a minimum viable prototype? To what extent are deep technical experience important at this stage of the firm? So with that in mind, where I'd like to start is it's a good time to be a technical professional. We have seen tremendous growth overall from an economic perspective, this week and last week's stock market notwithstanding. And a lot of value has been driven by, in my mind, innovation brought forward by technical professionals. I brought a couple of stats here. The bottom right there for interest shows companies with the most PhD employees. So perhaps unsurprising to many of you, Google, Intel, Apple, Microsoft, and Facebook, now Meta, as the top 5 employers there. This is not to say that you have to have a PhD to be a technical professional. We have lots and lots of folks who come to this without an underlying technical degree of any kind. They're self-taught coders, and yet they're what some people would call 10Xers. They do the work of 10 people. But it's one proxy for this data. Similarly, along those lines, compensation has been significant and growing for this, which again, in turn, becomes a reinforcing dynamic. This is an interesting place to work. It's well compensated, and therefore more people joining. So, I think the broader stock market has also demonstrated this. This is variously covered in the media as either a great thing, now called the Magnificent Seven, previously called FANG, FAANG, etc. Other people look at this and see increasing concentration of the stock market in a couple of firms with concern about what's the level of innovation that they're going to bring forward in that sense. So with this as the sort of underlying subtext, I want to deep dive into who are these people? What makes them tick? Can you point to any other group that has had this impact on the stock market or has had that type of career growth? I think we all struggle to do that. So who are they, in a sense? I had a little bit of fun with Dolly making this image. There's any number of synonyms that get put for these folks, whether it's heroes or whether it's 10Xers or whether it's prima donnas or whether it's any other number of terms that we put forward for this. One of my favorite examples is himself, Elon Musk, who during the early days of Zip2 was sort of renowned for his willingness to stay at the office all night coding, sleep in a beanbag chair type of environment. Just as an aside on that, the reports from his peers at that time were A, amazed with his productivity, but B, totally challenged by the kind of code that he would write. It was classically what we would call hairball code, right? Code written by one person rather than code written with a structure such that we can bring many people together productively to do this. In the software world, this is not the only place that we see this, but it's certainly been well studied. There's some long-standing ideas that there are particular individuals who produce substantial portions of the total code. And these studies go back to 1968, back when code was written on punch cards, not the way we know it now. So in that context, there's been a lot of time for us from a research perspective to study this and understand, A, as any of you are programmers know, number of lines of code is not a good measure for productivity. But B, to try and understand, is this a good thing or a bad thing that we have some people who write a disproportionate fraction of our code or who are central in some sense to the firm's product and service. So there's any number of reasons that this gets mythologized. I've seen a number of companies where they very much put these folks on a pedestal and assert this is great. We want everybody to aspire to be like this. Some of that shows up as sort of compensation structure. Some of that shows up in terms of external advertisements. Famously, Intel ran a series of ads a while ago that actually had one of their principal engineers featured in the ad and asserting this person helped invent USB, and that's who we are as a company at Intel, is we invent things, and here's this person in particular. But I think the broader sense here is trying to motivate the whole of the company by calling out great performance of certain individuals. And then we can ask the question of is this motivating or demotivating for the rest of the company? Now it turns out from a role perspective, this is not in any sense unique to software. I'm showing some data here in terms of physics, economics, and math. What's the rate at which certain researchers produce significantly higher citation counts than others? And there's some previous work by Norm Augustine, who looked at this in a variety of professions, not all of which were technical, suggesting that some fraction of the population was sort of doing more to contribute overall to the output of the firm. And really, what I think we want to look at in the context of this webinar is this a good thing? What does this mean for these folks? So let me sort of flip that on its head and say, there's a lot of folks who I would define as technical professionals, whether they're scientists or coders or engineers or otherwise, who have a very tightly held belief that they are inherently more capable. And specifically that they are more capable at like managing complexity. And the corollary to that is that they may feel like the regular rules don't apply to them. So I brought two examples of this. In the one hand, we did some work with a firm, which I will anonymize here, where they had the world's most complicated spreadsheet to try and estimate the size of future projects. How many people do we need for this project? They had all of these parameters trying to feed into that about sort of like how difficult the new product was and what the various levels of expertise were. All reasonable factors in discussion, but a terribly uncomplicated model. Basically, like they could not actually fit the model within reasonable error bounds. It gave them an overconfidence that they understood what actually drives how long a project takes. And many technical professionals, in my view, are guilty of that over modeling. Sam Bankman-Fried is another great example of this sort of we're different mentality. It's obviously been somewhat well studied based on the collapse of that exchange. But I thought this was fascinating here in one of the expose articles around this, where essentially they detailed how he had personally coded an algorithm that would trade automatically on their exchange. It was called ModelBot. And he had this whole idea that we're gonna let this thing loose and see what happens. And a number of the other members of the team very strongly disagreeing with that, asserting that there were a bunch of risks that come with that, as any time you plug your model directly into the trading opportunities. But what happened here is just so emblematic of this challenge. Basically, Bankman-Fried, trying to placate one of his colleagues, who notionally was his direct report rather than a peer necessarily, saying, yes, I agree that when we let this thing loose, we will carefully supervise it. We won't let it run on its own unsupervised. The minute that person left, he did the exact opposite. He plugged it straight in and then fell asleep. And what we've seen from testimony and stories of the other members of that management team are that basically everybody stopped trusting Sam after that point. And that's a real potential downside of heroes in this environment, is heroes who are not team players would be a very simplified way to say that, or heroes who have a history of trying to carry the whole team to nobody else's contributions. So I think it's worth saying sort of who are these folks? Who is a technical professional? We're using this as a fairly broad term. I'm not necessarily implying that this is a function of what degree they come from, but it is interesting, I think, to look at sort of like what's the installed base, if you will, of folks who might fit this definition. There's 25 million or so software developers. So 26 million, is a ton of folks. I've been very interested to see over time, at what rate are various countries producing STEM PhDs. China has had a whole state-sponsored initiative to try and increase those numbers, and then a number of other related pieces of that puzzle. Graduating in the most recent data, I had seen 70,000 STEM PhDs per year, and you can compare that against roughly 40,000 here in the US. I think the real key ingredient here is not so much education or background, but really the content of the work. Right? So to what extent are they actually using that technical training to do their work? And so therefore in scope here, we exclude product management generally. We exclude the role and tasks around P&L management and managing a business per se. And we are specifically focused on folks who are trying to use that set of technical tools to understand what's happening in the market, to be able to try and predict what will happen when people use this product, when people use this service, and to build things. That to me is really the sort of content here. So with that in mind, I put forward some of the challenges that we have seen from this group. And I'm actually going to ask you guys to hop in on this topic. We're going to launch a poll here. How many of these have you seen? How many of these have you observed in your work? I'll give you just a moment to go through that, and then we'll share the results and we'll talk about it. All right. So you should all be able to see the results of the poll on the screen here. Absence of process and too much process as the most frequent one of this set that you guys have seen. I think that's very interesting. There's a couple of others that show up classically as well. Oversharing technical detail, almost 2/3 of folks. Poor presentation communication skills, I think is part of the archetype. Fewer people seeing sort of like less of the commercial understanding or challenges going along that sort of value creation, value capture pair. So that's very interesting to me to see this. I think there's a lot of these challenges that are pretty broadly shared in my experience. There's folks who've been a technical professional themselves, and I would put myself in that category as well. I've said they in this presentation, but what I really mean is us. And then similarly, folks who may not feel like they display any of these, but who experience this with the rest of their team. So to my minds, not all of these are in some sense central to the role of a technical professional, right? Like if you're a technical professional, you may not have really any say or any job responsibilities that are tied to what the price tiers the firm sets. But to the extent that many of these do play into performance of the role, in my mind, many of these are coachable not to say that you're going to take somebody in the first percentile of communication skill and move them all the way to the 99th percentile, but there are big things that can be done about this. This is like the old saying that leaders are made, not born. And that is true of much of this in my experience as well. From a from a focus perspective, I think we have tons of opportunities from doing a better job at this. And this is data from a study that I participated in. This was run by Maddie Gollison here at MIT, trying to understand better why is it that we see huge attrition from software roles by women. So it's been known for a long time that we have an inbound problem in the sense that not as many women as we would like become software engineers. But the result of the study was really looking at, regardless of how we draw that box on the inbound side, they depart from this profession at a much greater rate than their male colleagues. Why is that? And the results of the study are shared here. Some of these, in my mind, are a function of how well the technical team works together. Many of these are challenges in my mind that we can and ought to do much better with in terms of managing teams. Another way to think about this is sort of who does this well? Like what companies really manage to create an environment in which their technical professionals really thrive? On the left-hand side, these are just my personal opinions. This is not the result of research. Some of these I have personal experience with, others I do not. But one way to think about this is sort of like judging by the outcomes, judging by companies that regularly bring innovation to market. We would expect, we would hope that the folks inside succeeded in part because of the processes, because of the leadership structure of the company, rather than in spite of it. Another way to look at this is to look at it from sort of which companies rise to the top in terms of survey data, like great place to work. Here I've grabbed the Glassdoor survey, although there are many of them, but then I've sub-selected the fraction of these firms whose output has a degree of technical mastery involved. So I don't think it's going to surprise anybody that NVIDIA is on that list, but a couple of the others here, MathWorks here in the Boston area, folks who build scientific computing software, might not have been on your radar for that, and where they have a number of firm policies that are directly designed to retain technical professionals. Microsoft, VMware, perhaps not as much of a surprise in terms of public understanding of what these companies do and how well they do it. I think, to me, one of the big questions getting into sort of like what motivates these folks is there's a wonderful separation between this idea of intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic being I am motivated by the mission of the company, or I have a personal set of goals that twin up well with the company's set of goals, and therefore I push myself. Versus extrinsic motivation, more classically being I'm here for the rewards that are offered. Right? I love the compensation. That's why I got into this. Yeah, we can ask the question, so which of these companies do well from that intrinsic side? So another way to look at this question is to ask sort of who's had big challenges with this. And I think Boeing is a very public one that has struggled with a number of controversies in the last 10 years. Boeing's board to weigh engineering and safety changes following 737 MAX crashes. Believe it or not, this article is from almost 6 years ago, right? And there's any number of articles that have come forward since. Boeing is a firm that, in many ways, sort of is emblematic of managing technical professionals in the sense that they have a product that is inherently technical. They have a product that competes on 1 to 2% difference in performance. Like you buy a whole new airplane because it's 1% better fuel burn than the prior generation. It's not 10%. It's certainly not 50% better, right? And so how you extract that last little bit of performance has a lot to do with sort of who's there and how they optimize that system. And certainly a company that's employed a lot of PhDs over the years. But lots of the sort of reporting and case studies that have been done around Boeing suggesting that there's an imbalance inside the firm that had to be rectified. Whether you want to frame that as sort of like, did the safety message percolate to the top, or whether you want to frame that as conditional on having all the information, did they make the right set of choices, sort of commercially versus safety? Is that in fact a trade-off? And as you sort of step forward in time on Boeing, I think you can see that there's a lot of nuance to this, that like figuring out to what extent this is a result of a series of engineering challenges versus some policy challenges. Like there's a lot to unpack, and certainly the difficulty in steering this ship over the last 10 years showcase how long-lived this set of cultures and behaviors can be if you potentially get it wrong. So going, fast forwarding in time, this is from fall of last year, still working on some of these same issues, right? This was not a sort of, oh, we just need to fix it this way, right? Oh, we just need to hire that set of people. So looking at this in terms of what do we understand about how to lead these people, I'm going to sort of presume a minimum bar in a word, and I'd like to think that most companies are going way over the bar, as is the gold medalist pole vaulter here in the picture. So from my perspective, the bare minimum to doing this is if you're in a position to lead technical professionals, you have roles into which they are binned, right? This is I think fairly straightforward. They are receiving some face-to-face coaching on what approach to take and not. They are receiving some set of feedback from you on how well they're doing. I had a good friend who passed away a couple of years ago who was the senior vice president of chocolate at the Mars Candy Company. Just a wonderful leader and just like a kind of boyhood style delight in chocolate. As you might imagine, the company whose job is chocolate would have all kinds of amazing executive committee meetings where it was all about what chocolate tastes better. Let's all try it out. Anyways, John Helfrich used to say, if you can do the following two things as a manager, you're doing better than 90% of the population that is managing people. And that is set goals and provide feedback against those goals on a greater than quarterly basis. Right? The annual review is a prescribed corporate process. That is not to say that that is the only time you should be providing feedback. So in addition to defining that set of roles and providing feedback against it, I think, again, the minimum bar includes some set of resources for folks to go after this. And lastly, some intent on career trajectory. Right? This is how well you do this is a whole question. How well companies do this is another whole question. But to me, this is sort of the minimum bar. And what I'm interested in is, to what extent do we see other factors show up in research that would add to that list? So I think one of the common fallacies from a management perspective is, we all use, Jira, Asana, task management software like this. This is not management, right? I think, unfortunately, I see a growing number of folks who believe that, like, I'm a good manager if I produce a lot of Asana tasks for my people, and then I really hold them to account on what they get done, right? And yes, it does certainly help and can make progress semi-transparent in this process, but this doesn't get anywhere towards the coaching people, identifying tasks, et cetera, et cetera. And further, it just sort of misses out on the broader idea that, like, are we all here to accomplish a set of granular tasks, or are we here to delight our customers, right? Or are we here to invent the future of energy, right? This is a very tactical view of the world, and you can very much lose the forest through the trees when thinking about this, right? So to me, that sort of gets at the underlying question of, like, how are we trying to motivate and incentivize productivity in our teams? If I sit in that left box, my mental model is dramatically different from people who sit in the right box. So just as another case study, if you think about who were the folks that developed AlphaGo at DeepMind, which was then acquired by Google, would you imagine that they framed the mission of that team along the lines of, accomplish as many tasks as we can? Probably not, right? There's a whole opportunity for team cohesion, as well as tapping into intrinsic motivation that comes with the framing around, we're here to take this technology as far as it can go, and hopefully to dramatically outperform what has been done before. There's a wonderful documentary, if you haven't seen it, on the last couple of weeks of the team building AlphaGo, and including some like last minute challenges that they were not expecting, and then the ensuing match against the I believe world number 2 at that time, in which AlphaGo beat the person 4-1. So, I spoke a little bit earlier about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivations. This is a long-held sort of research idea. One way we can study this is to look at sort of what motivates people in terms of what they report. So this is research done by Boudreau and Lakhani from a couple of years ago. In particular, in this case, looking at why do people contribute to third-party software? Like, why do people write Wikipedia articles would be an example of that. And you can see here, there's some on the left-hand side, but there's actually quite a diversity of motivation sources on the right-hand side. Whether this is part of my reputation as a professional, I just love the autonomy that comes with this, I quite literally do this for fun, or other. And I'm assuming that everybody would agree figuring out what motivates people is a key task of managers. But how well we do that, how well we actually figure out what makes people tick, really differentiates managers in my experience. Some people really do well in A, figuring it out, and then B, framing and assigning roles and tasks and goals that line up against that motivation. And other people don't do that as well. And that is one of the core skills in this environment. So I see a couple of questions that are coming in via the chat and the Q&A. Keep them coming. Eric and I are going to reserve a bunch of time on the back end here to answer any of the questions that have come in here. I think another sort of interesting case study on this, actually kind of building on my prior Boeing example, would be looking at SpaceX. Like, what do we know about this company? What does that suggest about whether they do this well or not? And then also, what does it suggest about to what extent this set of practices, if you think it is good, can be carried over to others? There's a couple of wonderful books that have been written on this, one of which is called Re-Entry, which was the sort of chief editor at Ars Technica, who was granted fairly unparalleled access to the firm and does a great job of illustrating what it's really like. If you're not familiar with this company, this is also Elon Musk founded firm, started in, I believe, 2002, which launches rockets and now is also in the telecoms business. They operate a large satellite constellation called Starlink. Company famous for its innovation reputation. First company to land a rocket on its end, first company to deploy more than 1,000 satellites to orbit. There's any number of technical firsts that can be ascribed to this. Company that has a fairly well-known reputation for being difficult on people, employing a lot of relatively young professionals who work incredibly hard, incredibly long hours. And that to me is already sort of a source of value judgment. Do we think that the purpose of motivation is to get people to work to long hours? No. From a company perspective, what I want is great ideas, great products, etc. I don't particularly want long hours, although in some cases one can be a proxy for the other. But there are amazing stories from a SpaceX perspective about like people quite literally living at the factory here, aka the launch site. And to me, one of the standout comments that I remember about this was in the first 10 years of SpaceX, somebody asserting, we were able to recruit such amazing technical talent that they would always do what's next. And this person saying, I remember the first time that we hired somebody who didn't do what's next, meaning we ran this test, the system failed, and this person sort of brought the test results over and said like, well, according to the test results, the system failed. And the technical leader then saying, so what did you do about it? And they said, well, we're going to have to redesign it. And coming back with like, why haven't you already done that? Why didn't you take that as a next step already? I think that is one of the more positive cultural attributes that this company has really brought forward, is sort of like, lots of people talk about individual ownership, but it's very much on display in this firm. People, in part because they're young in their careers and they've been able to sort of shape their careers at this company, feel like there's a real opportunity to actually own the content that they work on. So, I think, contrasting this against the earlier Boeing example, I'm not asserting that one of these is necessarily the right answer or the best model that everybody should work on. I'm just asserting that comparison is interesting here. I think that in terms of how SpaceX has managed its technical team, it's very much skewed towards we are going to do what hasn't been done, and we are proactively going to disrupt ourselves in that process. And that's somewhat different from a typical corporate structure. And I've grabbed Boeing here as the example, but I'm not asserting that Boeing is the only company that generally operates on this. There's a lot of public firms that operate on the basis of we're going to do what we have done previously and make incremental improvements on it. And that has implications for how we motivate our technical folks, and that also has implications for what kind of risk capital we take on as a firm. So I'm going to conclude with just a couple of slides here, and then we will open it up for questions. There's a fun model that was done here by John Ivanisevich and Thomas Dunning, where they called it 6 kinds of Einsteins. This is a little bit pejorative, right? So I'm not suggesting that in any sense labeling your people as know-it-all Einsteins is a good tactic to take. But in terms of like a descriptive or retrospective look at what are the different personality types that show up in this type of world, I thought this was an interesting sort of take on it. And what these folks were trying to do was sort of categorize what are some of the challenging behaviors that we see from technical professionals, and how is it that we would consider managing them differently based on their differences. So, folks who think that organization is the antithesis of making technical progress, and they delight in the creativity and fail in the presence of structure, which they're calling disorganized Einsteins. And these folks are saying like that there are a number of people who are in that camp, and in that setup, finding ways to pair them with a more organized colleague can really help sort of create structure without it being overbearing. And similarly, realizing that they're going to be enabled by a little bit of tasking support is helpful. There was a famous case at MIT a number of years ago where there was a PhD student in physics who was instrumental to a whole set of discoveries that were made in this particular lab, but who was terrible at writing, and who had helped any number of past PhD students go through and had spent way too long prior to graduating. And the PI in that environment said basically like, the way I'm going to manage this is this person has been so instrumental for the work of others. Other graduate student number 1, 2, 3, 4, you're going to do chapters 3, 4, 5 of the writing for their underlying work, right? You're not going to, it's their work. They struggle to put pen to paper. They've helped so many other people in the lab. Here's how we're going to structure this so that they have some support. So this is I think it's sort of an interesting model to go through and to say sort of, do I have team members that fit one of these buckets? And more importantly, do I have a diversity of team members in this sense? And to me, one of the big takeaways from having both worked and studied this is that many individual contributors who are inherently technical, when they get promoted into first line management or second line management, believe that they are managing their tribe. They're managing people like them. And that's true in some sense, but really a big lesson for me has been that technical professionals come in many different types. And if you're one of those folks who says, I absolutely hate meetings. When I'm the manager, here's how we're going to run things so much more efficiently so that we don't spend all of our time in meetings. That may well be a valuable thing to do. That may well speak really well to some of the audience. But technical professionals are quite varied in the sense that there may be other people that you're now managing who are not like you in that sense, who actually need tons more structure than you would have. So this is the last thing I wanted to share, which is in terms of motivating these folks. There's a wonderful framework that was put together called the theory of self-determination. All of us as humans need some set of these, and it's particularly true in my experience with technical professions. One, we all need autonomy. We all need to feel like we have some tasks and goals that we are uniquely in charge of. We all want to feel some sense of mastery, and in particular for technical professionals, they have in many cases credentials to support that assertion, but have an ongoing need to feel that they're valued for their competence. And we all want to belong in a group, and this is one of the harder ones from a technical professional's perspective. How do we make people feel like we belong in this organization, and that I have great opportunities to sort of work with others and amplify my contributions? So my takeaway here is that tech professionals need these just like everybody else, but how we give it to them, how we enable it for them, can be quite different than how we would do it for a more typical or for a broader base of direct reports. So with that, I'll wrap up. I think this is a really unique group of people. On my better days, I like to think that I'm a member of this group, but as a researcher, it's my job to study and be objective about that and understand what do we know, what do we don't know. And they present any number of challenges. I'll be interested to hear in the comments whether you guys experience some of those challenges. but there's many different approaches that are possible for this. In my experience, really the strongest possible path through this is stimulating intrinsic motivation rather than trying to force it from outside with extrinsic compensation, rewards, etc. And then the last one is that what makes you a great technical professional is not necessarily the same thing that makes the rest of your team a great technical professional. So as a manager, you have to figure out how to lead them, given that they are different from you, and figure out what makes them tick and how to support them best.
Great. Thank you so much, Bruce. We have a number of questions in the Q&A here, and a number of them touch on this question of motivation. But also I would submit, operating practice and identity, maybe even. Lynn Kingsbury has a point here saying, having worked in tech for over 30 years, her experience has been to simplify, moving away from complex implementation models. And you talked about the ability to master complexity as being one of the things that individuals tend to really pride themselves on. Now, if AI is poised to accelerate the simplification model, do you agree? And how do you transition folks successful with complexity to a less intricate approach?
Yeah. So let me tackle that separate from AI, and then we'll sort of add AI onto this. I think generally I very much agree with you, right? This idea that sort of we can handle the complexity as a source of pride. In some places that can be great from a motivation perspective, right? Like at MIT, I like to think that we have a great reputation for let's do the things that are hard rather than the things that are easy, right? Because that'll help us grow. But in terms of from a structure, from a leadership perspective, there's so much work that supports the idea that complexity isn't great, right? Complexity dilutes the core message that you're trying to get across. Complexity inhibits your ability to bring team members together on a shared purpose or to help them understand where their subsystem fits into a particular system, etc. Now, on the question on the table, though, to Lynn's point is sort of will AI help simplify that? And I think there's lots of opportunity for it too, but I don't think we're all the way there yet. My experience is we very much want to think about work between AI and people as sort of task splitting on what AI does well and what people do well. Right? People are creative in some ways, and AI is structured and creative in other ways. So what does that suggest about sort of what tasks I do and what tasks it does? But to me, the set of sort of forming goals and the set of sort of innovation and ideation tasks are still people-centric tasks to me that AI can support but not replace. And so I think the great news about technical professionals is that they can be open to sort of experimentation around these, but I expect to continue to see AI in sort of a supporting role in that. It's a great question.
Right. Thanks, Lynn. Alessandro Beltrami asks, is the approach to managing technical professionals the same for different generations, Gen X, Gen Z? And I suppose I might add, if not, what's different?
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, I think there's so much anecdotal evidence to support differences between these. And there's any number of stereotypes that are placed, right? So one of the stereotypes is millennials want to get dropped into important roles right off the bat, don't feel like they have to pay their dues, so to speak, and are going to want to hop between career growth to career growth opportunities quickly, right? And again, that's a stereotype, and we can talk about from a research perspective to what extent is that true. But I think in my experience, early career folks are particularly interested in understanding, sketch out the path for me. How am I going to progress? What are the learning opportunities along the way? The research is very suggestive of the fact that older technical professionals are much more motivated by the quality of the opportunity and how much innovation happens as separate from status. Right? They're not particularly motivated by title changes, particularly in sort of late career, whereas that may well work productively for early career folks. Being able to sort of step them up through a series of statuses that allow them to display the good work that they've been doing to their peers and be more marketable in the market, et cetera.
Great, thanks. Couple of interesting little two different takes on disruption or lack thereof. David Ralph asks, do you have any insight on heroes, employees who have made themselves essential, but will not let the company grow, and how to manage them so that the company can scale engineering delivery?
Yeah, it looks like we actually had a couple of questions on this topic. Yeah, I early in my career, I worked for a company. This was my first exposure to heroes like in the flesh. We were building software to help people model some fancy stuff. And we had a whole team that was building our software product. And it so happened that one guy would turn it around so much faster than everybody else, right? Like you talk to him, and then like next day he'd come in and be like, "Yeah, it's done." And the management of the company actually ended up essentially firing the rest of the team because they were basically saying like, he's got it all in his head, and he gets it done so fast. What do we need the rest of the folks for? And with that concentration comes the what's sometimes gruesomely called the hit by the bus problem, right? Like, are you successful as a leader if you've made the organization incredibly dependent on your presence, or are you successful as a leader because the organization can run independent of you? You've very successfully delegated. I'm totally in the latter camp there. So you're absolutely right. It's a huge potential impediment to growth, particularly for progress. Remember one of my mentors who was at Applied Materials saying, when you look at different companies to join as a young professional, be careful of the ones in which the promotion rate is equal to the retirement rate. And if the company is not in a growing sector, then basically like everybody's sort of moving through the queue this way, that is a related problem to the one that you're sort of describing in terms of the heroes. So I think that, in terms of managing heroes, I think one of the big questions is how they work with others, right? Are they incredible individual contributors who also turbocharge the work of others? That is the best possible situation you can be in. Are they incredible performers because they take on the scope that others could have and do it instead of them, potentially with some friction? That's a pretty challenging environment to be in. I remember actually a dinner that Eric and I were both at many years ago with Alan Mulally, who was the former CEO of Ford, essentially asserting he'd seen that any number of times in his career, and he had a personal rule that it was not worth it. Like, if they're going to poison the well for the rest of the team, no matter how much productivity they present, there's no way that the team couldn't do more than them individually if we get the structure right.
Just as you were addressing that point that Alan made, just a comment from Lisa Paradis, who said, one area useful to cover is when a high performer who could be considered an arrogant Einstein becomes a toxic presence in the team. And there's one response right there is you may not be able to work with them.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question from Claudio Natali, who is asking, what's the best way to engage and motivate technical professionals in improvement initiatives for product and process development, process improvement, non-value added analysis, and identifying AI automation opportunities. There's a lot there. Maybe just we'll pick one uh, out of the three there
Yeah,
in the
but
title.
that's a great point. And like how teams work together is a big piece of this, right? Like there's one part of this puzzle that is sort of like how do we identify what motivates people? There's another part of this that is how do we coach them on things that they're not good at? Like how do we sort of try and bring them up to the average, if you will, and what kind of um, positive impact can that have in terms of their performance? There's a whole question around the org, how do we structure the org, how do we divide responsibilities within team members so as to make best use of the set of brilliant minds that we have on tap. And getting to your question, Claudio, there's another big question around like what process we run on. So I guess my first observation is some people love process and other people hate it, right? And if you're going to have somebody who's in charge of improving process, they've got to love process. They've got to believe that process is a lever on outcomes. Yeah, I was on a project last year where the person that got picked to do the governance side of it was of the mind that we didn't really need governance. You know, we've lost before we began. I think a second side of this is you want to communicate that they will have the opportunity to change process, but that you have to do a great job of grounding what actually happens rather than what should happen in theory. Right? The big source of motivation for a lot of folks, like I've lived all the pain of our safety culture, and now I'm going to get to fix it. Well, that's a great thing, and they're going to want to hear from you on like, no, I really do want to hear what you have to say, and yes, we are really willing to do this, but you have to show us what actually happened versus what the process was. So part of the reason I say that is I will be co-teaching this new program with Nelson Repenning, and we have a whole dedicated session on specifically process design, which I see as one of the big levers for this.
Okay. Bruce, thank you so much. And as you can see up on the screen there, the first delivery is July 17th and 18th. It's on the MIT campus. Here, you can enroll at the website for this particular program. It'll be offered a second time in the fall, but first time up in July. Nice time to come to Cambridge and Boston in the summer. And learn more about this really important topic, which I think is really Bruce, as you've seen, has put a lot of thought into this. And, this is exactly the kind of thing that I think you would expect from MIT to have something meaningful and important to say about it. So we hope to see you very soon. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, and hope to see you in a classroom soon. Thank you very much.